Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And we are excited about Georgia and Tennessee on Saturday. We're going to do our part today to get you excited about it there as well. A couple of reasons why I think it's time for some optimism to kind of formulate here. I've asked you, hey, can you obviously a lot of folks have a lot of strong opinions coming off the game against Ole Miss. I understand where those come from. What we've asked is, can we hold off a week on making any kind of final proclamations about Georgia in the hope that the game against Tennessee goes better? So we're going to give you a couple of thoughts about that here today. We will address also the weird thing that came up yesterday with the Jake Pope stuff. I mean, just nonsense. Just so disappointed. But we'll address that here today. Jake Fromm stops by today. It's a good day to have Jake on the show as the Georgia offense continues to be in the spotlight. It's also a really good day to have Connor Riley on the show. We'll talk about some of the Georgia issues that he's written about, but also the college football playoff top 25 that comes back out again tonight, kind of how far Georgia falls and what this means for Georgia's pursuit of the college football playoff, assuming that Georgia does win on Saturday. We'll debate, we'll discuss some of that. And today, I've got a really fun announcement I want to make for you here today, too, that I think you're going to be really excited about. We'll tell you more about this here coming up in just a moment. So it is a jam-packed, fully loaded show. We are in a great mood, happy about what we think is going to be an unbelievable atmosphere on Saturday, and frankly, just sort of thankful to welcome Georgia back home again on Saturday, which is a nice thing, too. So we're going to cover all that ground. Glad to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Well, it was probably bound to happen. A conversation that's been mostly happening among Georgia fans has now kind of escaped outside the boundaries of DawgNation here. And I do think it probably sets the stage appropriately for the big conversation moving into this upcoming weekend as Georgia gets ready to take on the Tennessee Vols. And here's how it goes. You know this. If you look at kind of national media when they talk about college football, for the most part, I mean, listen to the Feinbaum show, for instance. Feinbaum talks about quarterbacks and head coaches. You'll never hear a defensive player's name mentioned at all. Nothing about a defensive coordinator or a running back or anything like that. It is a very surface-level program. It's sort of, I think it's a reflection of kind of the sort of, I hate to use this phrase, but sort of the mainstream media that just sort of floats above the surface here, kind of looking down at everything from 10,000 feet. There's not a whole lot of specificity with how college football is discussed. That's how the national media typically operates. And so when national media talks about, Georgia, they talk about Kirby Smart and they talk about Carson Beck. You talk about the quarterback, you talk about the head coach, and that's about as deep as it often gets sometimes with the national media, until a narrative becomes loud enough that all of a sudden it becomes perhaps a little bit more interesting than otherwise would be. The media types sort of get more interested in it. And I think we have an example of that for Georgia here right now, where coming off the game Saturday against Ole Miss, wasn't a great day for Carson Beck, but Beck was perhaps only one of the things that was wrong with UGA on Saturday, and perhaps not the thing that was the most wrong about UGA overall. We spent a good bit of time yesterday on our show talking to John Stinchcomb about the struggles of the Georgia offensive line. And discussions like that have become prominent enough that even national media types are sort of noticing that too. In fact, let me give you an example here from a guy that, generally speaking, I sort of like. I think he knows a lot about football. That's Joel Klatt, the analyst from Fox. And Klatt, on his show this week, when he talked about Georgia football, wasn't just stopping with an evaluation of the head coach, Kirby Smart, or an evaluation of the quarterback, Carson Beck. He was talking about something that I think the people that listen to this show that are a lot more plugged into Georgia football that they're talking about right now, which is it's a Georgia offensive line that this season, if we're just being completely honest here, has not been as good as it was advertised to be, expected to be, that the Georgia offensive line, including on Saturday, has had some real struggles. And to give you an idea of how prominent that discussion's becoming, this is what Joel Klatt said about it this week coming off the Ole Miss game.
The issue with Georgia mainly lies in the five guys up front. The offensive line is playing really poorly. And that's a problem for them because this is an offensive line that over the last couple of years has been able to maul people and been able to control the game in the line of scrimmage, and they're not doing that. And they certainly didn't do that against Ole Miss. And again, I touched on this. Ole Miss on the defensive line played great. They were aggressive, they were up the field, and they were disruptive. The entire game, I just felt like there was a disruptive nature to the front seven for Ole Miss. And because of that, Beck had no time. There is a disconnect right now in the timing of their offense, speaking of Georgia, in that the wide receivers are not breaking to where I would call their route structures should be, the pictures, the spacing. That's not being created at the timing in which Beck is ready to throw. So there is a massive disconnect between the skill position players at Georgia and their quarterback, Carson Beck. So he's ready to throw. He's got to wait a beat, and then the protection breaks down. The issue with Georgia mainly.
So listen, I mean, that's what we've all seen, right? We all kind of know that we've seen this with our own eyes, right? The timing's off. It seems like the communication's off. Receivers, quarterback not quite on the same page. And Beck's time to deliver the football when he kind of wants to in his own rhythm has been impacted by the struggles of the offensive line. We've been noticing that now for a while. And now even national media types such as Joel Klatt are noticing that too. That's just sort of what that is. But here's the point. It's not to kind of wallow in this any more than we have to. After, yesterday we were pretty candid about just how bad the game against Ole Miss was. It's not necessarily to sort of wallow in all of this. It's to give you, if you're willing to listen to me and believe me for a second, it's to give you two hopeful responses to what Joel Klatt describes there that we sort of all think we've seen. A Georgia offense that has just had its timing and its cohesion wrecked because, as Klatt says, maybe more important than anything else, a Georgia offensive line has just kind of had its struggles. So let me give you two hopeful points about this. Here's hopeful point number one. I do love the fact that the Georgia offensive line, at least based on the spokesman who stepped up yesterday, I do love the fact that the Georgia offensive line is really owning this right now. And I thought that whoever it is that makes these decisions, whether it's Kirby himself or sports staff or whatever else, I thought that Dylan Fairchild was an awesome choice to speak to the media yesterday. Because I think that Fairchild's just a really articulate leader for this Georgia team. He comes across as very believable. And Fairchild stepped up at that podium yesterday, and I thought he really owned the moment about what it has been, didn't sugarcoat it. In fact, it's really interesting. Have you noticed this? There's perhaps 1,000 reasons why this is true. But if you noticed that, like when Kirby Smart, and we'll hear from Kirby in a minute on this, have you noticed that when Kirby Smart is asked about certain things, about the play of his quarterback or the play of his offensive line or the play of his team overall, this season, for whatever reason, there's a lot of like flowery, non-specific, we think things are great. Things, man, you guys don't get how hard this is. This is great. Kirby, at times positive in a way that sort of strains the imagination of the average fan. Yet the players themselves, when they speak about their own issues or the issues of their position group, are oftentimes far more direct and far more to the point. It's just really interesting, the contrast that we sometimes get with a player who will step to the podium and kind of own the moment and say, yeah, I'm playing bad, or my position group's playing bad, or whatever else. Whereas like Kirby right now is sort of like tiptoeing around the edges of an issue like that. I just think it's kind of interesting. But an example of a very direct manner of communication yesterday from Dylan Fairchild, who in response, not directly to what Joel Klatt said, but things like what Joel Klatt is saying, this offensive line, man, got whipped by Ole Miss, and that messed up the cohesion of the entire offense. Dylan Fairchild stood up yesterday and said, hey, you know what? The responsibility is on us to show improvement. I love the way that Fairchild said it. Take a listen to this.
We just need to get better. I mean, it's plain and simple as that. We need to just attack this week of practice and clean up some footwork and some things that, just trouble most offensive lines, and just really just attack this week in practice and just get better with the fundamentals.
So let me tell you what I believe, and you can choose if you want to believe this or not. You obviously have your freedom to believe whatever you want, and I would never pretend that I've got the ability to influence any of you more than you want to be influenced. But here's what I choose to believe. I choose to believe a guy like Dylan Fairchild, representative of this offensive line overall, I think he's worth putting his trust in. I really do. And if I'm down in the dumps about the way the Georgia offensive line played against Ole Miss, when a guy like Fairchild stands up tall in front of a microphone yesterday, no easy thing to do after the game went as badly as it did this past Saturday, when a guy like that steps up and speaks as directly as he did, I find that to be pretty believable. I do. I find that to be, reassuring, maybe the wrong word, but at least somewhat comforting that everybody acknowledges the fact that improvement does need to be shown and that things aren't just all fine, that there is a need for that group, perhaps the entire offense overall, to play better. And a guy like Fairchild says, I want to do it. I want to help lead the way in getting it done. I love the phrase they use, we're going to attack this week in practice as a way of coming out and getting better. And I find that to be believable, frankly, not just because Fairchild is a good speaker, although I believe that he is, but I also find it to be believable because if we're being honest here, the Georgia offensive line has had some good moments this season. Overall, it's not been a Joe Moore Award level, offensive line performance. There have been plenty of years we kind of complained that Georgia wasn't getting enough credit when it comes to an award like that. This year, we're not so worried about that. That's not really been that kind of performance in the Georgia offensive line. But that doesn't mean there haven't been moments. Think about certainly second half against Clemson, almost the majority of the game against Texas. This Georgia offensive line has had its moments where it has played really well this year. So when they say, hey, we got to get better, it's not like they're just sort of hoping and wishing. They can point to proofs of concept from this year where they've done that. So I think it's important to know that the most recent thing that happened isn't the only thing that matters, and it may not even be the biggest thing that matters. It's just one of the data points to consider, and it was bad against Ole Miss, and as you all know, it's not the only time that Georgia's been bad offensively. It's not the only time that the offensive line has been bad here this season. But in addition to that, there are also some moments when that group has been good, something close to what it was supposed to be. And if they've called upon that level of play before and they found it, then it's at least possible they could find it again. Here's the other thing. And you can choose to believe this or not. Once again, it's totally up to you. But isn't there a chance that this upcoming Saturday, because it is another really good opponent, a team in Tennessee that does also have another really good defensive front, and this happens to be a little bit of a rivalry game, and this happens to be a little bit of a game that Georgia's kind of gotten used to sort of playing its best in, isn't there a chance that this opponent is perhaps the exact right way for all of that to come together, and perhaps it is the sort of motivational force that could provide the improved level of play that Georgia seeks, that maybe this is the exact opponent for all of that? Well, Dylan Fairchild also talked a little bit about that idea yesterday, too.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and in this league, you got to move forward. You got to bury things, and that's what we've done. We're moving forward, and we're looking forward to attacking this week and just getting better at this week practice.
So, like I said before, you can choose to believe that or not, but I find Dylan Fairchild to be a pretty believable guy, and I'm still really glad to have Dylan Fairchild on my team, so to speak. And I do find myself willing to go to war with a guy like that, or said better, watching him go to war against Tennessee on Saturday. That's still a guy I'd put some faith and trust in. That's still a guy that I would say is part of the solution at a place like UGA more so than being part of the problem. That's a guy that I find to be pretty believable with what he said there. Now, it's also fair to point out that Kirby Smart was a lot more, I don't want to say defensive, but he came to the defense of his Georgia offensive line when he spoke to reporters a little bit yesterday, too. And I said before, the players like Fairchild are stepping up and owning it and saying, you know what, we got to be better. But from Kirby Smart's perspective, a little bit like he's kind of come to the defense of his quarterback, he doesn't seem to think things are as bad for the offensive line, at least based on the words that he chose to use, as people like Joel Klatt apparently think. This is also what Kirby Smart said about that yesterday.
I'm completely confident in our offensive line. I think our offensive line it's got a good offensive line. We can't put them in a harm's way. And when you play on the road, guys, there's not a guy in this room that's lined up at left tackle with 80,000 people screaming at the top of their lungs, and he knows it's a pass. He gets a distinct 0.5 advantage, and 0.5 is a lot. Trust me, I know from coaching this league, it's hard to do. You got to find ways to help people. You got to be able to run the ball to slow it down, and you got to help them out some.
So, with all due respect, and obviously as a Georgia fan, I love Kirby Smart as much as anybody else does. Why would you not? After the success that he's had, but I have to admit, I don't find Smart's words to be quite as believable there as I find Dylan Fairchild's words. Like, there's something about Dylan Fairchild that he says just sort of sounds like the truth of the moment. Smart sounds like a little bit more of a flowery description of the situation. But there is still an element in which Kirby Smart brings up there that I think also ought to serve as a reminder for us that, hey, when you see Ole Miss getting the best of Georgia on Saturday, one of the things they did have to their advantage was a raucous crowd that, as Kirby Smart said, maybe gave them a half of a second's worth of a head start that maybe made things even tougher for the Georgia offensive line. And that's a reminder of something we talked about yesterday. Is that on Saturday, maybe it's Georgia that has the crowd advantage. And when the Georgia pass rushers on the field, maybe they get off on the Tennessee offensive line. And maybe this Georgia offensive line gets the benefit of sort of playing in more favorable conditions they've played in this year. I mean, doesn't it seem like it's been 6 months since Georgia played a home game? I mean, doesn't it seem like, I think it was Stuart Mandel, not always my favorite, but Stuart Mandel had an interesting number yesterday where Georgia has played more ranked opponents away from home than it's played home games all year long. I mean, that's how daunting this schedule has been. It's been one grizzly bear after another of top 10 ranked this or top 15 ranked that, and almost all of these games have taken place outside of Sanford Stadium, away from where Georgia gets a chance to be on this upcoming weekend, which is between the hedges. So it all goes back to what we've been talking about before. Clearly, Georgia needs to be better, whether it's offensive line or something else. Clearly, Georgia needs to be better. But this team still seems, through it all, quite intent on committing themselves to getting that done. They have worked their way through a grind of a road schedule, and now they get a chance to come back home. And what I'm really hoping for this weekend is that Georgia fans will welcome them home, and Georgia fans will give them a chance to show how good they can still be. And they'll get after that Tennessee team the same way Ole Miss fans and Texas fans and Alabama fans were getting after Georgia, even Kentucky fans to a certain extent. That this can still be an incredible season for UGA. And an awesome home crowd can help fuel Georgia to get to that point. No guarantee that it happens. Georgia may lose again. Georgia may not make the college football playoff. But man, coming home for this weekend is a great chance for Georgia to show improvement. Dylan Fairchild says, hey, this may be a good opponent for us to kind of really find ourselves against. And Kirby Smart says he's still got plenty of confidence. It'd be nice, whether you truly believe it or not, for Georgia fans to fake it till you make it and show some of that confidence too. And just perhaps your confidence in UGA, if you're willing to show it, maybe it's rewarded this Saturday night. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad you're here. Video 10 a.m., radio, podcast as well, just all kinds of spots for you to find our show. We're just glad you find one that works for you, and really thankful to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible, too. Clearly a messy situation for Georgia for an ugly game against Ole Miss. We're not pretending otherwise. But when it comes to your own mess that needs to be cleaned up, caused by a fire that breaks out somewhere, or perhaps, a roof collapse, or water came in, pipe burst, something along those lines, when you've got your own mess to clean up, the restoration specialists of ServPro, that's the name I want you to consider. Find them online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. They will come to work for you. They'll put it all back together and get it all back cleaned up like it never even happened. That's what the restoration specialists of ServPro are all about. Also, each franchise independently owned and operated. It means you're doing business with a company that has just as strong of an interest in a positive outcome for you as you do for yourself, because it's their livelihood, after all, that's connected to this. So find them online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that today. All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, before I bring on Connor Riley, I'm going to make a really fun announcement that I'm really excited about, and a couple of our great sponsors kind of coming together to help us do this. So we're going to tell you more about that here coming up in just a second. Prior to that, I do want to go around the doghouse. And listen, I don't want to talk about this. I find this whole entire subject to be irritating, but it's one of those deals where you sort of feel like you kind of have to. Otherwise, you just sort of feel like you have to. So for a couple of minutes, let me do this, and then we'll see if we can kind of get back to the positivity. Obviously, a weird thing happened after the game against Ole Miss on Saturday where video was discovered, I believe On 3, the first to publish this, of Georgia. He's a defensive back primarily. He's playing a lot of special teams, I guess, right now. It's Jake Pope, recent transfer from Alabama, who went to Buford High School. He was seen on video, and then we have this to show you, really what looks to be like celebrating after the game where, Ole Miss beat Georgia, and obviously he was connecting with a high school teammate. Family was obviously, happy about the Ole Miss win, and he, I guess, just sort of got caught up in some of that. It is obviously a bad look, and when I first saw this video, honestly, we spent, time dissecting the nature of Carson Beck's smile from the sideline in the fourth quarter of Saturday's game. Well, if that's worth commenting on, then this is obviously far worse than that, even though it's a lower profile player. This is just the kind of thing that Georgia just doesn't need. It's not a good look. I think it has the potential to cause a locker room problem. I think it's one of the reasons why Kirby Smart gave such a forceful statement about it. But in fairness, Pope himself has also offered an explanation for this. I'll show it to you on the screen. I won't read the entire thing to you, but I will give you at least a little bit of Jake Pope kind of offering his explanation. We may not have that. We don't have to worry about that. That's fine. But Pope basically kind of explained what have kind of has been sort of understood, which is that kind of connect with a high school teammate, just sort of, I guess, playing around with them a little bit, perhaps forgetting that as a Georgia football player, when you've got that uniform on, everyone's going to recognize everything that you're doing. In this particular case, sort of owning the fact that the video that he's found in was not a good video at all, not a good situation there. Pope certainly acknowledged that while also trying to offer some explanation for why it happened. Kirby Smart, though, when he was asked about this yesterday, gave a very, very forceful and very, very matter-of-fact description of all this in a way that you don't often hear Kirby Smart speak, and that's ultimately probably why this is worth mentioning, even though it's not a very pleasant thing to talk about. Kirby Smart making it very clear how he felt about what Jake Pope was seen on video doing after the game against Ole Miss on Saturday. Here's Kirby Smart.
Yeah, what an idiot. Just stupid. I didn't see it till today, but he's embarrassed about it. He's upset about it. That's obviously a childhood friend of his. He grew up and played with there at Buford and knows him, hadn't seen him in forever, but just not real smart. But to be honest with you, I don't have time to waste energy on that. You know what I'm saying? Like my focus is on Tennessee. I'm not worried about that.
So I think there's potentially two reasons for why Smart speaks out as forceful as he does on that. Thing number one is, and this just may be an element of human nature, like he says he only found out about that today. We don't know how soon prior to that press conference he became aware of this. Obviously, somebody somewhere probably would have thought, hey, you're going to probably be asked about this. Let me make sure you've seen this video. So there's a chance that in that particular moment, that image was still pretty raw and real for Kirby Smart. So maybe sometimes, like I do on the show, you don't quite have time to filter yourself the way that you maybe think that you should. Maybe Smart would have filtered his remark a little bit more if he had more time to kind of prepare for that. Maybe he just didn't have time for that. Perhaps that's the case. But here's the other thing. Yeah, it's okay with the statement on the Pope thing. People can find that online. Basically what he said is the same thing that Kirby Smart described. No, that's not a problem. But the other thing here, too, is that I think part of the reason you get such a forceful response from Kirby Smart is I think he knows that a lot of people in that locker room probably didn't like that very much. At least they would certainly have the potential to not like that very much. And keeping the peace in the locker room after a bad performance is probably a pretty good thing to do. So kind of giving that stern of a rebuke to Pope, probably necessary to kind of let it be known that Kirby Smart is perhaps also aligned with Georgia players who are like, why are you doing this after a game when I'm kind of risking my body out there trying to fight for this, program, and you seem happy after the game is over with? There is really no other way to interpret this other than this was not a good thing for Pope, not a good thing for Georgia. But at the same time, part of this from my perspective is I'm going to give him some grace. I'm going to let him grow up and learn from this. I don't know what kind of football player he's ever going to be at Georgia. I don't know. I obviously, like any Georgia player, hope he goes on to have success. But I'm not going to condemn him for that. I think that Smart rightly said this was kind of an idiotic thing to do. I think Smart's right for describing that as sternly as he did. But we're also not going to condemn him. I'm happy to see him, go on to do good things for Georgia. I'm willing to sort of forgive and forget. But calling balls and strikes on this and say, hey, that wasn't a good thing, and it would have been way, way better had you not done that. I think Smart's right for doing that, and so we'll kind of leave it at that and make that around the doghouse here today. Now, on a much happier note, and listen, stories like this kind of remind you that Georgia really needs something good to happen for it. And Saturday would be a great time for that to happen. And if it does, all of the goals that Georgia has had in place since the beginning of the season, they remain in place. We've been trying to tell you this week, our thought is that we want to kind of set a positive tone moving to this day on Saturday. So here's the extent that we're going to go to do this. Do you know who the main sponsor of the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy is? Well, of course, it's our friends from Dr. Pepper. And so in light of the very big game on deck for Saturday, Georgia hosting Tennessee, Dr. Pepper is actually bringing the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy here to our state as a celebration of this kind of being the place to be for college football on Saturday. And if you'd love to see the trophy that Georgia's held on to twice and could perhaps hold on to again here for this 2024 season, we want to give you a chance to do that. Coming up this Thursday, we're going to broadcast our show live from Beaver Toyota in Cumming. So if you want to come by and see us, we're going to do an on-location show that day, live broadcast of DawgNation Daily, and we are going to bring, courtesy of Dr. Pepper, the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy. So if you want to come by and get a selfie, a picture taken with the trophy, and see us do the show live, I'd love to meet you and say hello to you. Great chance to do that this upcoming Thursday. Obviously, our show starts at 10 a.m. We'll be there at Beaver Toyota of Cumming. But more importantly, our friends from Dr. Pepper bringing the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy. What a cool thing to do the week of the big game. We're going to do that with you on Thursday from Beaver Toyota of Cumming with Dr. Pepper and the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy. All right, before we're done today, it's Jake Fromm. We'll talk to the Georgia quarterback about everything happening with UGA. But let's also, for now, get into all the other stuff involving these dogs with Connor Riley, who's written some great stuff at DawgNation.com. Here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to Connor Riley. Is that an Edmonton Oilers sweater that you're wearing here today? Is that right?
Absolutely, and good on you for calling it a sweater and not a jersey, as it is, in fact, a sweater.
That's right. Even as much of a Southerner as I am, I still know that vernacular when it comes to hockey. They don't say jerseys, they say sweaters. But it's well done by you. Kind of a cool-looking piece of sports paraphernalia there. Not quite as cool, though, yesterday when folks became aware of what happened with Jake Pope. I don't want to spend a million hours on this because I just don't think it's necessarily warranted. But I do think that Smart was right to condemn this action. Not necessarily condemn Pope, but I think stuff like that has the potential of causing a locker room problem. And so sometimes it's appropriate to sort of speak in a matter-of-fact manner and be somewhat stern about an issue. I did not have a problem with Smart calling this action out for what it was yesterday, which was kind of an idiotic thing to do, a very bad-looking video, far worse than the alleged smile from Carson Beck near the end of the game. What did you make of how matter-of-fact Kirby was about all that yesterday?
I was a little stunned he was as strong in his vocabulary as he was, but, in just thinking of it from a PR standpoint, we're not talking about what Kirby Smart said about this and not what Jake Pope was doing there. And I think that's a heady PR play by Kirby Smart there. Look, Jake Pope, I think, obviously should feel pretty bad about this coming out. There are a lot of people in my life I love. I don't know how many people I would be like jumping up and down with in terms of seeing them, especially after my team just got obliterated in the manner in which Georgia's did. It's a very odd video, especially when you consider the fact that Georgia's players were all leaving and moving and trying to make their way to the locker room as quickly as possible. And Jake Pope did not play a snap on Saturday, so he wasn't out there on the field at that final kneel down there. So, either they came and found him or he went out into the fray and found them, because that doesn't appear to be all that close to the Georgia locker room in terms of where that video was captured. And I understand that he has a relationship with the people that he was jumping up and down with, but like the Carson Beck thing, and we know this from the way these TV booths operate, that could have been a saved image that they had and they replayed there in that moment. That Pope thing, there's no ambiguity about it. And so for that to sort of pop up in that manner after a game like that, especially when you're a guy like Jake Pope, who hasn't contributed in a meaningful way this year, it's just a very bad look all around. And look, I'm sure he feels terrible about what he did there in that moment, and it's certainly a learning experience for him moving forward. But I agree with you in the sense that it's good on Kirby for using the strong language in which he did and sort of nipping this in the bud and letting it mushroom into something bigger. I think we all pretty clearly know how both Kirby feels about this and how the Georgia team at large does as well.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing about this and I'll move on. Goofy never plays well on video. It just does. And compare this to, like, say, Nate Frazier, who Kirby also got all over for his 15-yard penalty against Florida. But give me competitive edge guy who gets a little too celebratory after a big moment against a hated rival, even though there's a tangible cost to the team of, oh, that's 15 yards and that's a penalty, and Kirby Smart wasn't happy about that either. Give me Nate Frazier doing a throat slash over Jake Pope doing whatever that is any day of the week. I'll take a Nate Frazier on my team who's a little too happy after a big moment and a little too disliking of the, as I like to call them, the lousy stinking Gators. I'll take Gator chomp into a throat slash 9 days a week more so than I'll take whatever it was that Jake Pope was caught doing.
Well, gosh, BA, when you put it that way, it's pretty easy to make it out that way. But yeah, I agree. And again, Frazier's incident comes in a moment where they just tied the game. Obviously, a competitive atmosphere. With the Pope thing, like, you want to get home, get out of there, get safe, because we've seen these field storming things turn a certain way at certain points. And he's doing none of that and reveling in the moment in a way where, you've seen pictures, video that our great Cody Chafin's captured of players coming off the field. Nobody was too happy about what happened there at the end of that game. And for Pope to have such a stark composition of that, it was just very jarring to see. And you can understand why Kirby Smart took the tone in which he did.
I think that Georgia can bounce back against Tennessee. And perhaps the evidence that supports that point of view is not as robust as I'd like for it to be. But I do believe that Georgia can bounce back against Tennessee. And the agreement that I've sort of made with the audience is, for those who don't think that's true, and for those who think this season's just, doomed to a premature end, I've asked them, would you be willing to wait another week before we make those proclamations? Maybe you'll be proven to be right, and if you are, I'm more than happy to give credit to people who are right. But can we wait a week to do it? Can we give this team a chance to come home, play in front of a friendly crowd, and have a better result? And I do believe, even we started the show by talking about the offensive line. I know you've written about that at DawgNation.com. Even for a group like that, boy, really struggled badly against Ole Miss. And even though they're facing a good Tennessee front this weekend, I think they can play better. How much reason for hope do you believe there is for Georgia to give a performance against Tennessee that's a little bit more reminiscent of second half against Clemson or the majority of the game against Texas, and not quite so much the ugly affair that took place in Oxford this past Saturday?
We know it's in them. We've seen it at times this season. It hasn't been a consistent Georgia team. I think that's perhaps the biggest frustration that you could have with this team right now. But we know that they can rise to the level. And again, they've played a brutal schedule. And I know no one wants to hear that, but they've played more games against teams that are going to be ranked in the CFP top 25 tonight, 4, away from Sanford Stadium than games in Sanford Stadium, period, 3. And look, I know that this is a different Tennessee team, that they've got a stout defensive front and they're playing well up there, and Georgia's offense has taken a step back this season for a number of reasons, which, if we want to get into it, we're going to need like a solid 2-hour classic offseason DawgNation Daily show to just really go after it. But this is a Tennessee team that Kirby Smart, under Josh Heupel, has owned. It is an offense that Kirby Smart has owned. And quite frankly, this Tennessee offense with Nico Iamaleava, I get in my own head about how to pronounce his name. Iamaleava. And so, like, it's not playing great at the moment. He's banged up in some regard entering this game here. And I know they're confident they can play, but how effective can he be We're going to find out on Saturday. And it's just an offense that Kirby Smart has found a way to consistently stifle and own. Tennessee always seems to, be riding on a high coming into this game, whether it be at their place or in 2022 when they were the number one ranked team. And we all know how those games have all ended. And I can understand the pessimism out there. I know not everyone is into Vegas. I know not everyone is into lines and point spreads and things like that. This game opened at 8.5 going into the weekend. Georgia was an 8.5 point favorite. And after the Ole Miss loss, it actually went up. I think that speaks to the way that maybe they see these two teams. It's a Tennessee team that hasn't exactly played a great schedule. Yes, they did find a way to get a win over Alabama at home, mind you, whereas Georgia lost on the road there. And so it's a Tennessee team that has struggled offensively this year. And look, we've said it time and time again. If Georgia's going to win this season, and I was saying this even before last week, if Georgia's going to win this season, it's going to be because of their defense. They weren't winning because of their defense on Saturday. They needed their offense to make plays for them. They could not. They're going to need to win with their defense on Saturday. And with Tennessee's offensive line being what it is and their offense being what it is, I think they're going to be able to do that. Even with Nico being hurt, they had to run Dylan Sampson 30 times in a game against Mississippi State, a game where you should get up big early and put a team away. Georgia, for whatever, you want to make of that Mississippi State game, offensively, they scored 41 points and comfortably, coasted that day and made every play they needed to. Tennessee was not able to do that. And so I think if you're Georgia, you shut down the run game like you almost always have against Tennessee. I think that's going to be a path to victory there.
So let's talk then with the latest CFP set to come out tonight. How far do you think Georgia drops after having gotten beaten by Ole Miss? And how does a potential win against Tennessee sort of change the playoff picture for UGA? Kind of give me a snapshot on where you are on Georgia's playoff hopes at the moment.
Yeah, I think Georgia will probably drop to somewhere around 10th. Maybe 9th. I think they should be ahead of Notre Dame, given that Georgia has just played a better schedule than Notre Dame has. And, for what those losses are, still not a home loss to Northern Illinois there. So I think that's the barometer that I'm sort of looking for when it comes to Georgia and where they rank. Where are they in comparison to, say, a Notre Dame? And I would include Miami in there as well, because I would have Georgia ranked above Miami as well, even though Miami also only has one loss to this point. As far as Georgia and its playoff chances, look, it's real simple in my opinion. You win your last 3 regular season games, all of them at home, you're going to the college football playoff. You may not be hosting a first-round game like I know a lot of people envisioned or a lot of people hope for, but with that schedule, with wins over Tennessee, Texas, and Clemson, you're getting in the playoff, especially when, if Ole Miss wins out, I believe they get into the playoff as well, and Alabama's probably getting in because that's just the way the world works. If you get those wins over those programs, and your 4 SEC teams are Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Georgia, you feel good about that. But they've got to win those games. Tennessee's going to be a tough game on Saturday. That Georgia Tech team just beat Miami a week ago. And I'll tell you this, Brent Key, while they haven't beaten Georgia in a while, they're not going to be afraid coming into Sanford Stadium. And that game is going to be an electric atmosphere, I hope, on a Friday night there. So they've got some work to do to get home. But if they win their 3 home games, and they've won every home game they've played in Sanford Stadium dating back to the 2019 game against South Carolina, this team is going to be in the college football playoffs. So if you win your home games, which I think in this new look SEC, you just have to do if you're going to have a successful season, you got to win your home games. Georgia's got a home game on Saturday. They've got to find a way to win it.
Yeah, would you say then that the 2 teams that have the head-to-head wins over Georgia right now, Ole Miss and Alabama, that of the other SEC teams right now, we have the potential anyway, and I still think we're going to have some upsets, but the potential anyway of a glut of teams with a 6-2 league record. Because Ole Miss and Alabama have beaten Georgia head-to-head, would you give them, I guess, the nod over some of these teams when it comes to that conversation of who can make the playoff?
No, because it's tricky because only, like, if you're imagining that Georgia gets to 6-2, Georgia is in. I don't care that they lost to Alabama. I don't care that they lost to Ole Miss. They'll have a better resume than either of those teams in totality. And so it becomes a question of how much do you factor head-to-head when, going forward, those head-to-head games, unless they're played in the first round, are going to be on neutral sites. And so that absolutely changes things. And so, I think when we get the full picture and you look at the full resume, like, Georgia's not going to have a loss as bad as at home to Kentucky or at Vanderbilt on their ledger. And so I think that helps Georgia in that regard. Georgia could certainly finish ranked fairly high, especially if they get another win over Tennessee, which, again, you look at the resume, yes, they'd have the win over Alabama, but a road loss to an Arkansas team that is probably going to be 6-6, and then you lose your other big game against Georgia, and you go through and do the math in terms of trying to figure out tiebreaker scenarios. Tennessee's played a pretty poor SEC schedule by comparison, and their non-conference win against NC State does not match up at all to what Georgia did with Clemson. So there's a lot to be sorted out here. Of the 2-loss teams, or the teams that we feel will finish with 2 losses, we know Georgia's obviously going to be there. I think at the end of the season, if Georgia gets 10-2, they're going to have the best resume and could very easily have a case to be ranked above them. Now, Ole Miss, if they win out, you might get that bump of, hey, this team is playing well at the end of the season. They fixed some of the issues that were there at the beginning of the season, and maybe that's what gets them above them. But I do think that moving forward, you're going to have Georgia, with the totality of their resume, which would include a win over Tennessee, a win over Georgia Tech, a win over Clemson, a win over Texas. That's a really, really strong resume, and I think that's going to ultimately help Georgia in that regard, even if this difficult schedule has put the Bulldogs in the position in which they are right now.
It's a fascinating conversation, and it happens again tonight. CFP Top 25 comes out. Are we doing a show? Because I know last week we said with it being late because it's not the normal time. Are we doing a show tonight for the CFP Top 25?
We are doing a show. We're going to try. They're supposed to start at 8:30.
Yeah.
Of course, they're doing it convolutedly because of the basketball game on ESPN. We're going to try and get on around 8:40, hoping that's when they have the announcement rankings out. We're going to be off the air by 9 o'clock. That way we don't keep you guys up too late. But we are going to labor to get a show for you guys because that is what we do this time of the year here at DawgNation. We deliver.
I am totally into it. I think it's a great time to be doing it because I think tonight's CFP Top 25 is going to be fascinating. I can't wait to talk to you more about that. Always appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll continue to read everything you're writing there at DawgNation.com and talk to you tonight on video. And, of course, back here again very soon as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I want to do more on what Connor was just talking about here in a moment. Prior to that, though, let me remind you, we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And for our golden shoe later on today, we're going to bring on a guy, not going to bring him on the show, we're going to show him, that's been a big part of our DawgNation cruises over the years. And I just love the camaraderie that we form with the people who get a chance to be a part of our cruise. It's just such a cool thing. And so, if you enjoy DawgNation and you maybe come out to some of our events, maybe you're coming to see us Thursday, do the show live from Beaver Toyota and Coming with the Dr. Pepper College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy. And you would think, boy, it'd be nice to have even more interaction with the folks from DawgNation, such as the people we bring on the show here, every week. Well, the DawgNation Cruise is just a great way to do that. And it's a great time to go ahead and get booked up and be ready to go on that DawgNation Cruise for this upcoming April. Jessica Slater's wonderful travel agent. She can tell you all about it. In fact, I want you to give her a call. And when you do that, she'll tell you all the details about not just what makes the DawgNation Cruise so fun, but also the specially themed DawgNation events as a part of this DawgNation Cruise that make the DawgNation Cruise unlike any other Royal Caribbean cruise you can take. So I want you to email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. You can do that, and she'll give you all the information. You also give her a call there, too, and be a part of that and see that. I don't have the number right now, but we'll let you be a part of that. Enjoy the best. There you go, 770-718-9147. That's her number, 770-718-9147. Try that one more time. Think this English. 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. Be a part of our DawgNation cruise in April on board Utopia of the Seas. It's the newest of the Royal Caribbean cruise ships. It's an Oasis class of ship. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous vessel. And we're going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. We're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. We're going to have a great time. Specially themed DawgNation events, too. Can't wait to see you as a part of that. So, Connor talks about, Georgia. Hey, you win the games that you have remaining all at home, and you're in the playoff. I, generally speaking, think that's also true. Resume-wise, Georgia would be deserving of that. I believe that just based on the way that it's playing out, it's not just me who believes that. I believe the committee would likely do that. But it is important to know that if events happen as they possibly could, then there probably would be a 6-2 league record SEC team that does make the college football play. In other words, we can say, oh, yeah, Georgia keeps winning and they're in. They probably would be because of the nature of their schedule. But we are putting some faith into a committee that has proven time and time again not to be worthy of our faith because, A, they're not transparent. B, they sort of say one thing and do another. And I'm just not quite so sure how deeply invested in the actual product they really are in terms of being able to make a qualitative analysis, choosing one team that's actually better than another. For the most part, all they've really ever done is count losses. And so that kind of quantitative analysis, listen, you could train, SEALs to do that. It doesn't have to be, anybody with all that much expertise. So when you say, oh, yeah, Georgia will get the nod because Georgia will have the better overall resume, I believe that's true. And I think it's likely going to be true. But you're still putting faith into a committee that hasn't always earned that. And I do think one of the things that we'll be watching pretty closely for tonight is what the committee does. Let me give you 3 teams to think about here in particular. Let's talk about one SEC team and 2 Big Ten teams. Texas doesn't have a win over a team ranked in the college football playoff top 25. Neither does Penn State, neither does Indiana. Let's watch for Indiana in particular because they're still undefeated. They beat Michigan on Saturday. So with Georgia and Miami losing, there is room for teams like Texas, Penn State, Indiana to now move up perhaps. But these are teams that really haven't beaten anybody. In the case of Indiana, they really haven't played anyone either. And so on a neutral field, obviously Georgia would be a sizable favorite over Indiana. Georgia's a better team that's played a tougher schedule. Indiana's a good team. They have a great record, but they've played essentially no one. That I think the one thing that we're still going to be looking pretty closely to figure out is, does this committee truly recognize who are the good teams that have played the tough games and who are the teams that are just sort of up there right now without any real proof of how good they are? And frankly, Texas is one of those teams. Texas was gifted such an easy SEC schedule, and therefore right now we really don't know anything about them, nor do we know much about Penn State or Indiana. It's teams like that, how the committee handles them tonight, that I do think are going to be fascinating. And one more small point to make here. I also think when you think about relatively benign games that are still coming up, Connor mentioned the game for Georgia against Georgia Tech, or think about, Florida, which gets to play LSU and Ole Miss, 2 teams that both have some playoff aspirations. Start thinking about some of these games, Arkansas on Saturday against Texas, for instance. Some of these games where upsets seem very unlikely. The odds of us making it through the season without any of those occurring, I still think is relatively small. We're going to probably still see some surprising results in the SEC, so keep your eyes out there on that too. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And now, here on DawgNation Daily, we'll turn our attention to the Kroger Fresh Take and get ready to bring on the terrific former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Always happy to have him on the show. And boy, Jake, you're there in the Lions facility. You got your Detroit hat on. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I know you spend the rest of your life doing this. But, boy, that Detroit team looks like a lot of fun right now. Another big win this weekend. And it clearly seems like everybody up there around the Lions and huge personality like Dan Campbell. Detroit seems like it's a pretty fun place to be these days.
Man, it's a great place to be, no doubt. Thank you for having me on the show, Brandon. Winning is a lot of fun, man, and we're just continuing to, go back and grind and do all the little things that brought us kind of up here and up to this point. So, man, got a great group of guys in the locker room, great staff, and, man, just happy to be here, and let's keep this thing rolling.
And conversely, on the other side, obviously, and, every football player has wins and losses. You experience both over the course of your time, and, you were around Georgia after a loss, and you know how, it's just the apocalypse. It's just, taking over for fans, for media. I'm sure it's an uncomfortable spot for the players there, too. What would you assume the mood is like for this team kind of coming back home where, hey, they're still predicted to beat Tennessee. They're favored to win the game. If they do, as we were just talking about, they have an inside track of making the college football playoff. And yet a lot of people, perhaps justifiably so, are just devastated with how badly they played against Ole Miss. What is that concoction of emotion like for Georgia in a week like this?
Yeah, you were exactly right. There is a lot of doom and gloom there. The world's over. Can't believe we lost kind of going on. But the nature of the schedule, the nature of the business is not allowing those guys to kind of dwell on that for very long. Man, they play a great opponent in Tennessee coming up this weekend. And still, to this date, even with 2 losses, so I saw you talking about this earlier on the show. They still control their own destiny. I do not see how the committee keeps this Georgia football team out of it if they continue to win out. Man, they have a ranked win over Texas, the number 1 team in the country, got the best strength of schedule rate, and they passed the eye test. So to me, they control their own destiny, and they have to win this game. It is playoff football for them from here on out. And, man, they don't get to harp on this loss very long, and they get somebody to go and take it out on and a great football team in Tennessee.
I know you follow the sport pretty closely. Before we get more into the game against Georgia and Tennessee, do you think it's good, bad, or just indifferent for the sport that there's so much confusion right now? For instance, I mean, my whole life is essentially talking about Georgia and SEC football. I have no idea who's going to play for the SEC championship. The tiebreakers are so confusing, so convoluted. You know, assuming that Tennessee and Texas don't win out, that's the easy result. Anything else other than that is bizarre. You know, the Big Ten's going to have its own version of that, assuming that, you know, Ohio State and Oregon don't keep winning. That there is just so much complication for who these teams are going to be, the wild tiebreakers that could occur. The games themselves, I think, set up to be pretty good. But how you figure out who's going to play in these games is more complicated than it's ever been. What do you think that means for the sport, that we're kind of in a time in which deciding who's the SEC championship participants or even the college football playoff participants, it's so complicated? What do you think that does to the overall conversation around the sport?
Yeah, I think the powers that wanted a closer to NFL product and having it come down to the wire basically got exactly what they want. I think it's a funner experience for the fan, because we're sitting here talking about it, stressing about it. We don't know who's going to play, if Georgia can get in, what they got to do to get in, who's got to lose. And so it makes it kind of fun. It makes it kind of erotic almost a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it creates such an importance for each and every week, each and every game, and the points scored, the points against, how bad you beat certain teams. Every single game matters. Every play matters. And man, it is a all out sprint playing in college football nowadays.
So, look, I know you love your former team, and I, of course, love Georgia football too, and very, very optimistic that Georgia can win the game on Saturday against Tennessee. And yet, there's also, I think, kind of an honest conversation that's happened this week of, man, this Georgia offense right now is just not doing anything right. Then they're not running the ball. They're not really throwing it. Offensive line had a bad game against Ole Miss, and at times, you know, probably a lackluster performance for a good portion of this season. It just sort of, if I'm being completely honest, it just sort of all seems to be broken here right now. What can you do about that? And why do you think this offense in sort of all phases seems to be having so much trouble right now?
Yeah, definitely no secret that they're struggling a little bit. Just looks like everybody is pressing all positions, all players, you know, even kind of staff a little bit. And man, they are doing all they can to create explosives and score points. But man, it just seems like they're beating their heads up against a wall almost. I mean, there just needs to be better play all the way across the board. I guess, you know, maybe kind of go back to simpler football. Let's get everybody on the same page, knowing what's going on, and let's just execute and execute. So, you know, it kind of seems like they're trying to fix all the problems in one single play, and it just doesn't happen that way, man. Let's just get a positive play, and let's get another positive one after that, and let's keep this thing going. But yeah, I'm so curious to see what the product is going to look like against Tennessee versus a very good defense and a very strong front seven. Much like Ole Miss's, man, they can get to the quarterback, they can stop the run game. You know, what the answers are going to be for a Georgia offense kind of after that performance, I have no idea. But I know it's going to start with Carson and how he comes and responds, and can he spark something on offense that everybody can rally behind.
So I think the assumption that a lot of us have made about the game against Ole Miss was, after obviously a period of too many interceptions, that Georgia seemed to. Now, Kirby Smart has disputed this, but to the naked eye, it certainly looked like Georgia chose to have a very safe and careful game plan. I think the average depth of target for Carson on Saturday is about 4 yards. You know, obviously, most of the completions are kind of like right there near the line of scrimmage, or screen plays. And it seemed like, in absence of a running game, that the overall passing attack was just sort of too careful to be impactful. Is that kind of what you also saw from the game plan on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I did. It's kind of very similar to what I saw, you know, but what was the reason behind it? I mean, to me, there's two reasons. One, they're trying to protect Carson a little bit and kind of keep him from turning the ball over, or two, hey man, that Ole Miss front line, they can get after the quarterback and they can really ruin an offensive day and especially a quarterback's day. So, kind of what was the reasoning behind that? Was it more to protect Carson kind of from himself or more to protect him from the defense they're playing? I don't know. I just know, man, at some point, especially when we're down in this game, we got to kind of move the ball and get some chunks and take some shots, because if we don't ever kind of take our opportunities, man, we'll never kind of get the ball going.
So let me ask you too simplistic of a question. This is probably overly simplified, but so if I had the play card in my hand, I'm going into Saturday, is this one of those things of, hey, I've got to risk the interceptions and take some deep shots down the field because if I don't connect on those, I'm not winning anyway? Or is it a situation where even though the running game has struggled, I've got to challenge these guys to go out there and find some rushing plays, because if you can't find something on the ground, you're not winning anyway? Like what does Georgia, in your mind, need to commit to doing against Tennessee on Saturday to give itself a chance to have a better performance than it just had?
Yeah, I wish it was that simple. If I'm head coach, and I'm kind of looking at this from an outside perspective, what is Tennessee's kind of offensive situation? Is Nico Amaliava, is he playing? How many points do we think we need to win this game? We are playing at home. That's a slight advantage. Going to have the crowd into it. I know they're going to be rocking for those guys. I mean, it really comes down to how many points do we really think we need to win this game? Do we have to score 40? If we have to score 40, hey, man, it's all chips on the table. Hey, Carson, we're going to go and rip this thing around, and we're going to let you spin it. But, man, if we need 20 to 25 points to win this game, I think it's just going to be kind of a mix of both, the ground and pound and letting Carson rip it when we have a good opportunity and think we can dial something up. But I think regardless, it has to start up front, and we have to win the line of scrimmage and being able to set some kind of dominance a little bit in the running game to take all pressure off, get the backs going, and be able to run and win this football game late in the game if need be.
I want to ask you one more thing before we let you go. Let me remind folks before that it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today. And obviously, Thanksgiving looms here. A lot of folks getting excited about that. And your local Kroger is the place to go for the turkey and all the sides that go with that. You want a great holiday season, Kroger's going to get you stocked up on all the great food and the drinks and all the other fun stuff that makes that a wonderful experience for you and your family. So stop by, shop in store on that, online at Kroger.com. Great savings and great opportunity to enjoy yourself. A wonderful Thanksgiving time of year. Your local Kroger's got you covered on all of that. Jake, one thing before we let you go here. Obviously, one of the things that kind of went viral a little bit on Saturday was the supposed smile from Carson Beck after near the end of the game. Now, honestly, what Jake Pope got caught doing on video is probably far worse than that. But let me just say, stay with the quarterback here for a moment. I get that body language matters to a certain extent. And we actually talked about this, I think, last week in some form or fashion. I guess the question I would ask you is how tough is it being the quarterback, having the cameras sort of fixed on you all the time, and every little gesture perhaps getting dissected? Now, to a certain extent, Carson's kind of invited some attention because he's certainly no stranger to social media videos and things like that. But still, at the same time, hard to be under a microscope like that. At times, the quarterback position, I'm sure, is not very fun because of that. Latest example of that from Saturday. What do you make about that conversation?
Yeah, it's just the reality of where we're at with cameras, with social media. When you add money to the mix, it makes it even worse, and it makes it that much more exponential. But honestly, I had no issue with that at all. It looks like kind of Carson and Jaden Rashada were having kind of a private moment, private conversation, man. And honestly, I've been there many a times where you kind of tell a joke just to kind of humanize yourself and try to forget about this awful day that we're having on offense, and just kind of reset you a little bit. So really, I have no issue with that at all. There's no telling what they're having that private conversation, a joke, and just trying to live life a little bit. So I have no issue there. The Jake Pope thing, that's completely different. But from Carson, nothing there. But as far as the whole, man, I do want to see better body language and really from the whole offense as a whole to really try to figure out and get some things going.
No, I think that's really well said, Jake, and I'm always glad to have your perspective on that because unlike certainly me, you know what it feels like to kind of have that spotlight on you, and obviously what Carson lives through right now, and obviously all of DawgNation hopes that Carson goes out and has a great game on Saturday as Georgia returns home against Tennessee. It'd be a great spot to have that take place. We appreciate your time as always. Thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take, and we will look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Carson Beck. Actually, Carson Beck. Jake Fromm. I get my quarterbacks confused. Good stuff there from Jake Fromm, and we're hoping for good stuff from Carson Beck there on Saturday. And I'm glad to get the sort of humanizing perspective on that because, listen, I'm sure, Jake felt like when he was the starting quarterback for Georgia, that camera's always following on the sidelines. It's uncomfortable. And, sometimes you do, in the heat of the moment and the pain of a loss, what is it called? Sometimes, is it gallows humor? Is that what it's described as? When you kind of find a way to sort of laugh at the absolute worst possible time because it just kind of takes some of the edge off. It's a defense mechanism. I think there's probably something to that. It's certainly more defensible than what Jake Pope was seen doing. I think that Jake's right to describe that the way that he did too. So good news is there's nothing going on here that couldn't be cured by a win Saturday against Tennessee. We really do believe that's a great possibility for UGA. I'll tell you this, I had a great chance yesterday to kind of hang out with my friends from Cercheros, and boy, I love what Cercheros is doing right now. They've got brand new locations set to open all across the state, really, but coming soon to like Gainesville and Dahlonega and places like that. They're going to have some awesome new locations coming, and more people get a chance to sort of try the fresh Mex that Cercheros is famous for. One of the things I learned yesterday that I didn't realize is, so when you go through the line there, if you want like your vegetables kind of like grilled up and kind of heated up as they go on your burrito and things like that, to just kind of make it even more fresh than it already is. Like that's the kind of thing that Cercheros wants to do for you to make your experience exactly what you want it to be. It's delicious food. You have a great chance to enjoy that right now, whether it's a big catering party for you and your friends getting ready to watch the game this weekend or be a part of the tailgate, or if you just want a delicious lunch or, a good meal, stop in store one of the locations there. You can enjoy that too. I'm talking about the friendly Tex-Mex that they're famous for, 25 fresh toppings they're putting on the burritos and the bowls and all that kind of stuff. You can enjoy the great food that's Georgia grown with 30 locations all across our state and many more coming very, very soon. Cercheros got a great thing going here right now. You've heard us talking about it here on game days around DawgNation primarily, but also here on our show too. And it's time for you to give it a try. Find the Cercheros closest to you, Cercheros.com. That's S-U-R. Sometimes my sort of Northeast Georgia accent takes over. I want to make sure people can understand this. Cercheros, S-U-R-C-H-E-R-O-S. That's Cercheros.com. And enjoy the really delicious fresh Mex. 30 locations across our state, even more coming very soon. So make sure you check out Cercheros today. So I told you, really fun golden shoe here today. Of course, we do this, heavy heart remaining. Eddie's still not with us right now. Hopefully, Eddie coming back here soon. We'll give you an update on Eddie and his situation later on this week, once the mood sort of feels appropriate to do that. People are kind of still in a bad mood about Saturday, but we'll give you a good golden shoe today. Y'all know how much I love Dr. Pepper. Our buddy Ness Baldazan wrote in on this about that. So his wife gives the young child here little Dr. Pepper, a great shot of Ness and his family. Our buddy @Dog Cruiser showing the baby they were enjoying that Dr. Pepper. To me, that's raising them right there. Look at that baby transfixed by the Dr. Pepper, having a good time. Ness sent a great video about that, and I'll just show you the one shot there. But it's really well done by Ness. You love to see the little one there enjoying that Dr. Pepper. A very funny thing to see. Ness will give you a golden shoe for that. Lousy stinking Gators. Gator Hater Updater, 1,466 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia, and that is our Gator Hater Updater. Hope you all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Let me start on DawgNation.com here for a minute. We'll get some comments. We'll kind of roll through all of these. Herb Hamilton says, what happened to the quarterback sitting with the offensive line while on the sideline? Seems like the unit could communicate better when they were all together. Yeah, perhaps that's the case. And, obviously, we've talked about communication issues with Georgia here this year. Some of the stuff, when you saw how badly the offensive line seemed to just sort of whiff on Saturday. I think the assumption that you would draw is that had to be communication related. Otherwise, you wouldn't have all 5 guys sort of missing at the same time. So one way or another, hopefully that communication can be improved. DT says, win 7 in a row, knock out the rivals in the process. Gonna love it. Go Dogs, sick 'em. Yeah, I mean, look, if Georgia could win out and get to 10-2 against this schedule in this playoff this year with a chance to be, I don't care if they do have to go on the road. A lot of very winnable games for Georgia in the playoff. Maybe they're not all winnable. Maybe Georgia can't win the national championship. But man, this season still provides a chance for a lot of fun. It provides a chance for improved play. And it provides an opportunity for something that can be called a success. Now, listen, not anything is successful. I mean, if Georgia somehow missed the playoff after starting the season preseason number 1, that's probably an unsuccessful season. And you'd have to ask some tough questions as to why that happened. We're not going to be afraid of that conversation. We're not. We hope we don't have to have it, but we're not going to be afraid to have it. On the other hand, if Georgia, can get to 10-2, can get in the playoff, perhaps advance in the playoff, well, now, it's not a national championship, but it's also not nothing either, right? I mean, I think that it can't all just be national championship or bust. Otherwise, that's just sort of setting yourself up for a lot more unhappiness in life. And, it's not a successful season no matter what. We're not going to just sort of declare a victory no matter what the result is. But at the same time, we're not going to define success so narrowly that it's only national championship or bust. Does that seem fair? Perhaps. Eugene Marine says, how come when you call someone, they call you right, you tell the wrong number, they call you right back? Yeah, some people, I guess, are pretty stubborn about stuff like that. Randy Glass wants a DawgNation Daily sticker like on the helmet. Well, I've got some stickers I'm going to be sending out here pretty soon. So Randy, maybe we can connect. And I don't have the DawgNation Daily sticker yet, although maybe we'll get some of those. But I do have some stickers that I'm going to be sending out. So, Randy, maybe we can do that. Hit me up. We'll see if we can figure out a way to make that happen. Randy Hall says, as we're talking, this seems to be the worst loss in the century. Win this Saturday and all attitudes will change, including mine. I do think that's true. I think that the life cycle of college football opinions is generally pretty short. On top of the world after the Texas game, just like that, that's gone. Down in the dumps after the Ole Miss game, just like that, it could be gone. That, failure is just not final, typically speaking. And, one of the reasons why college football games are hard to predict is that people have a tendency to sort of fixate on what they just saw or their preconceived notions, and they have a hard time kind of weighing all the evidence somewhat equally. I think that's part of it. Let's see what else. On YouTube, Randy Martin says, how's everybody feeling about the overall season so far? It feels kind of blah. Yeah, but it's also incomplete. And remember, this is corny, but everything feels like a failure in the middle. Anything that ever became a great success, let's say you're making a movie, or let's say that you're building a house, or let's say you're learning how to play the piano. Everything in life feels like a failure in the middle. Things only feel successful at the beginning when you've got a little bit of momentum and beginner's luck and a little bit of adrenaline. They feel successful at the beginning. They feel successful at the end when you have the satisfaction of being done. But any endeavor that anybody ever tries always feels like a failure in the middle. And so right now, in a roundabout way, we hope we are in what is kind of the middle of the Georgia season with 3 more regular season games to come and who knows how many postseason games after that. This could still be something close to the middle of the Georgia season. Y'all, we can go point to a date in both 2021 and 2022 in the middle of those seasons where people were mostly miserable then too. Because you're kind of in the middle of it, and there's a weird relationship we have with college football where it's the thing we sort of love more than anything else, but for the average college football fan, no matter how much he loves it, college football still mostly makes him unhappy on a day-to-day basis. The team's not recruiting who you want them to recruit. They're not, playing exactly the way you want them to play. That's just sort of the weird part about this world that we're in. So that is perhaps overly philosophical, but that's my overall viewpoint on that. Spencer Clark says we're inconsistent at this point. Can you really fix things this late? Once again, I mean, go back to 2022. Think about halftime of the Mississippi State game. That was not pretty. Think about the totality of the Kentucky game. That wasn't really all that pretty. There were things being said even back then at times. But winning more games brought that consistency. Maybe that doesn't happen this year. There's no guarantee. Past performance is not indicative of future results. No guarantee that it will. But as Randy pointed out, we see opinions change wildly all the time. That people don't have a tendency in the world that we live in of college football of feeling the same way for 4 or 5 weeks in a row. They just don't. People fall in love after the wins. They become, enraged after the losses. I mean, we are one game away from, if it goes really well on Saturday, from everybody being kind of right back on cloud nine again. It's just the way that it goes. I mean, I've been sitting in this chair now. This is my 10th year doing this. I just see this all the time. It's one of the reasons why I try to be somewhat careful about what I say, is because if you go too far one way or the other, you have the potential of looking pretty foolish a couple of weeks from now. Ty Jackson says the play calling is so very predictable. Hell, everybody knows what's going to happen. I don't disagree with that. I mean, look, just calling it like it is, you can't be as bad as Georgia has been offensively compared to the typical standard for the program and not have that, to this point, I don't want to say failure, but let's call them struggles. Those struggles have to be owned by everybody. They do. That includes coaches. I would say that's true. That when it's been as bad as it was on Saturday and as bad as it has been for a lot this year, a portion of every game, right? There's no game which Georgia's played well offensively for the entire game. So that's a lot of struggle that has to be kind of owned by everybody. Totally acknowledge that. But here's what I can't quite decide. And people have got their own opinions about this. But for me, I'm trying to sift through this. I can't quite decide if this really is an offensive system, as some of y'all would say, that's just not working. Just an offensive game plan that's just not working. Or if this is an offensive game plan that's hamstrung by either too many injured players, a lot of running backs, for instance, some offensive linemen, and just an overall talent level that's just not stepping up. Wide receiver, quarterback, just not quite stepping up the way they could. I just don't know. My typical thing is, in the old days especially, I was a lot more comfortable blaming coaches than blaming players because the coaches were the ones getting paid, at least theoretically. But now, I mean, Georgia has a lot of money invested, assumingly, in its players. And we're not too far away from a day and age, if it's not already happening now, where the players will be paid more than the coaches, because that's what happens in the NFL. Coaches in the NFL get paid less than the players do. So I think I'm a little bit more open to, is this Georgia just not correctly using its NIL resources to get the best possible players available? Or is this an offensive system that's just not quite working? I guess I'm sort of open to either possibility, but also what I'm really hopeful for is option C, which is, Georgia played so well down the stretch, which I do believe is still possible. Georgia played so well down the stretch, that whole conversation became moot. I do truly believe that's possible. Foster Moss says, well, we only have 3 regular season games left. It seems like the season just started. It's a cliche, and I feel like I say it all the time. But I'm here to tell you, Foster, I have never had a season go by as quickly as this one, ever. I think in part for me, that's because it coincides with some other sort of busy things we've had going on in our life. Everybody else has that stuff too, of course. But I have never had a season go by like this where you just sort of blink your eye and it's, I don't want to say quite over, but it is going by really fast. Jay Buchanan checking in from enemy territory says, up here in Chattanooga, representing the Dogs especially hard this week. What is your key to the win against Tennessee? I personally think it's connection between the quarterback and the wide receivers. I think there is something to that. And let me also say this about, the idea of, hey, I'm going to put my Georgia gear on and be really, really out there in the heat of hostile territory. That's a good Georgia fan right there. I saw this on Saturday too, or I should say Sunday too. People driving back from Mississippi. You see all these Georgia fans, man, they are decked out in that Georgia gear. Winning is not easy. Like these Tennessee people this week are coming after Jay. He's got that red and black on, and he's just showing it off. Georgia fans on Sunday, it had been very, very easy to sort of find something more neutral to wear, I guess. But Georgia fans didn't want to. Like, that is the part of all of this that needs to be understood. I think because we do the show from the perspective of a fan, we probably have a better understanding of this, is that people have a tendency to, kind of dismiss fan behavior as erratic, or 1 minute you're on top of the world, next minute you're down in the dumps. But I also see the other part of that, which is even though the emotions kind of go up and down, the dedication never changes. Georgia football fans love their team. Through thick and through thin, they are there year after year after year. And for a long time, Georgia didn't quite have a football team that matched the intensity of the fans. If we're just being honest and candid, there was a long period of time in which the Georgia football team performance did not match the fan performance in terms of, all the ways in which that can be measured. Just didn't. But now it does. And Georgia fans are obviously enjoying, seeing the output, the results match the dedication that they've given to their team for such a long time. And so for people in Chattanooga, where it's enemy territory this week, for sure, it's enemy territory all the time, but it's especially heightened this week. And for Georgia fans who are just as bought in as ever as they drove back from Mississippi, not a fun drive because I made it myself, after a loss like that, I love that. I love that. Jay says, I'm a DGD for life, no matter what. Been a fan since 1990 when I was born, and I'll never change. Jay, that's awesome. That's awesome. Good stuff, my friend. And to answer your question, you say connection between quarterbacks and wide receivers. I do think that, let me see if I can say it this way. The game is going to be won, I believe, somewhere in that ratio of explosives and negatives. In other words, if Georgia can have a higher, total of their offensive explosives and their defensive negatives they create, whether it be turnovers or, tackles for lost sacks, that on the Georgia ledger, subtracted by the Tennessee version of the same thing, it's the preponderance of the big plays on offense and defense, the explosives on offense, the negatives you can create on defense, the sheer larger number between Georgia and Tennessee. That's probably what this comes down to. And I also think that Jake Fromm brought up a really good point before. And this is one of those, we'll probably talk about more about this week. This is one of the things you can't lose sight of from the Ole Miss game. He says, the question that Georgia's got to ask itself offensively is, how many points do you think you have to score? Because whatever that number is going to dictate the way in which you call the game. And, it certainly seemed like at times on Saturday the Ole Miss offense was getting whatever it wanted. There were open receivers. Caden Lee, the former Kennesaw Mountain product, was certainly open a lot. But ultimately, Ole Miss still wasn't scoring a ton. They did finally get to 30, but that's not until the very end of the game. That they were settling for field goals a good bit. Georgia did get a stop late in the game at a time in which that still really mattered. That Georgia didn't have to come out and score 40 on Saturday. They just needed to score more than they did. And a couple of more offensive drives resulting in points, because they had these long, methodical drives that just resulted in no points. Man, if you turn a couple of more of those into points, then it is probably even a different game on Saturday, as badly as it was. And so with Tennessee coming in this weekend, many of you know this, but if you haven't watched them closely, you may not realize, this is not 2022 Tennessee. They're not scoring 50 points per game. That, it's not one of these situations where you got to come in here and be ready to win the shootout. I don't know that Saturday requires that, because That's not really what Tennessee's been offensively. And so you don't have to become 2019 LSU overnight if you're Georgia. You just need to be a little bit better than you have been. And you need to avoid the sort of empty possessions where you give it over on a turnover, and kind of give favorable field position up, or you waste a bunch of clock without getting points, because that really hurts you sometimes if you're facing a deficit. That I think if you want to put like the most positive veneer on this, is that Georgia doesn't necessarily need to be transformationally better on offense to have a chance to win. They just need to be incrementally better for the entirety of the game, I think. Chef Jay Bowen says the offensive line's got to give Beck more time. I totally agree with that. He says that was the main problem against Ole Miss. I do think that's probably true. We talked a lot about that. They've just had their issues. Curtis Jackson says, remember the Bible, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Last Saturday was just one day of rain. He says the sun's going to shine again on DawgNation, and we know that's true. Becky Rutledge says there's going to be a huge number of recruits at the game. He says, please remember that. Let them know how much you love our guys. Yeah, I mean, listen, it is just really fun to give yourself over to a great atmosphere. It's just, I mean, I was talking to people about that yesterday. It's just really fun to give yourself over to that and be a part of a stadium environment that's just special. And on Saturday, that's going to be the invitation. You can come in there and you can create that. You can feed off that. You can enjoy that. That's what Saturday has a chance to be. And I do believe that Georgia fans will answer the call. I did think it was interesting that yesterday Kirby Smart did not directly ask for that. A lot of times Kirby Smart implores the fans, hey, we need you on Saturday. He didn't really say that yesterday. I think Smart, perhaps mindful of the fact that, nobody's in that great of a mood here right now. And Smart, kind of got on you a couple of weeks ago. So without him really coming out and directly asking for it, I would suggest you need to give it over to him anyway. Like, allow yourself to just get into the moment. And, yeah, it may end badly. You may be like those Georgia fans who had to, drive back to Mississippi with the sting of defeat. Or you may be like our guy Jay up there in, harm's way, enemy territory of Chattanooga, knowing that you've got trash talk coming your way if Georgia loses. It's okay. It's okay. Take the emotional risk to put yourself out there. I think you'll be glad you did. Greg Childer says that Georgia's trying to run an offense in a 20-yard radius with a passing quarterback. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that they reduced the number of deep throws on Saturday because I think they were fearful of turnovers, and perhaps they kind of overcorrected on that too much. Brandon Griffin also says that if Gunner was ready, Kirby would play him. I mean, maybe. I think there's always going to be a certain truth to is that, all head coaches, for the most part, are careful with their quarterbacks. Kirby's not all that different on that. But the point where I think I probably agree with you is, and I say this as someone who's very optimistic about Gunner Stockton's future, if Stockton was equal to Beck right now, there would be rumors to that effect coming out. I mean, positive news always breaks from the Georgia ranks. Positive news always leaks out. When so-and-so's doing well, it always leaks out. It just does. And sometimes you have to recognize the dog that isn't barking when things are quiet, perhaps noticeably quiet. And it's honestly been pretty quiet on the backup quarterback front as of late. I would read something into that, and I'd say that as someone who honestly believes that Gunner Stockton could be a great starting quarterback for Georgia next season. I truly believe that. But if he was the equal to Bag and a threat to overtake him, we'd be hearing about that. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says, I remember I had some trepidation before the Texas game, and you called it 100%. Sometimes we need to be reminded to have a little faith. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case, and I appreciate you saying that, Matt, acknowledging that. I know for you, the Texas game, because you obviously your wife's a big Texas fan, and you were around all those Texas people, where you live, that game mattered to you the same way, the people that live in Chattanooga and Dalton, places like that, know a lot of Tennessee fans. Rome, a little bit close to some Tennessee fans too, a little bit. So I get all of that. And there's a chance that I'm wrong. There's a chance that I look foolish, that Georgia does play as bad on Saturday against Tennessee as it does against Ole Miss. But I'm sort of okay with that. I'm sort of okay. Like, that's a level of foolishness I'm willing to risk, right? I mean, given the choice of too optimistic about a team that ultimately wasn't worth that level of optimism is a better option for me than too negative about a team that was ready to provide a pleasant surprise. And that is a personality type. That is, you're either wired one way or the other. Some people choose to be negative at the forefront because, at least I believe, they don't want to risk the heartache on the backside of it. They sort of pre-decide to be, upset so that the blow is lessened and softened on the other side. Some people just don't want to look foolish. They don't want to look dumb if they predict Georgia to play better and they don't do it. That's the kind of dumb that I'm okay being. I just am. And if Georgia plays as bad again on Saturday, then I'll be more than happy to own it. I said before, whatever negativity y'all want to say after this upcoming Saturday, floodgates are open. You can say whatever you want. We'll give you all the freedom to say whatever you want. But if it's true now, it'll even be more true a week from now. And if it's perhaps not true, then all the better reason to wait on that. Alan Verbanching on the subject of the Colby Young situation. We will talk more about Colby at some point. I thought that Kirby did have some interesting things to say about that yesterday. We don't quite have time for that today, but I did think that was interesting. Mike Mazzell says everybody else in the country has a quarterback that comes off the bench. What happens if Beck gets hurt? Kirby's not prepared for a backup ready because apparently he hasn't figured out who his real backup is. Well, the real backup, I believe, is Gunnar Stockton. I just do. And I don't know that every team has a quarterback. I mean, the best that I can tell, most teams handle backup quarterback pretty similar to what Georgia does. There's not a ton of teams that are putting in back. First of all, Georgia's not blowing teams out enough to even worry about this, but there are not a ton of teams putting in backup quarterback, having that guy, chuck it all over the yard in the fourth quarter of the game. They're winning 40-0. That just doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen very much. If Beck were to get hurt, Georgia would put Gunnar Stockton in, and they would, kind of ride with that right then. They wouldn't give up on the season. They would probably start to construct a game plan around what they feel like Gunnar does well. But we're not talking about an injury right now. We're talking about, a coach's decision, a CD. And if we were to the point that was even a reasonable consideration, there would be a ton of rumors suggesting that. Because here's what I can tell you. Think about a very famous quarterback switch. When in 2017, obviously bad memories for Georgia fans, when Tua got inserted into the game against Georgia. First of all, I think haven't we had people confirmed to us that Kirby told the team at halftime that was going to happen? They'd put Tua in the game. That I had talked to people around the Alabama program that year who would have told you scrimmages and all these things were like the same way with like moneyed boosters and former players and things like that get to go see the Georgia stuff. When the people were going to see Alabama, they were coming away thinking, boy, Tua looks like the better quarterback than Jalen Hurts. But there were plenty of Tua rumors of, man, this guy's really, really good. This guy may be better than Jalen Hurts is right now. So when that happened, Nick Saban wasn't just rolling the dice. He was doing so on the basis of a guy that was rumored to have been practicing very well all year long. And I'm not saying that Gunner's not practicing well. As I've said before, I am very optimistic about Gunnar Stockton's future. But the same level of rumor does not exist around Stockton right now. It just doesn't. Mike Bazell mentioning that Austin Simmons came into the game for Ole Miss on Saturday, and move the football down the field on Georgia. And if Gunnar Stockton came in for Georgia against, so-and-so because of Carson Beck's injury, he may very well do the same thing. He might. But Austin Simmons only came in because Carson Beck got hurt. In other words, hear what I'm saying, don't hear what I'm not. I'm not saying that Gunnar Stockton, if Carson got hurt, couldn't step in and play well. Perhaps he could. What I am saying is that there aren't a lot of rumors to substantiate the idea that Gunnar would supplant a healthy Carson Beck. Those type of things typically have a degree of somebody made a biblical reference before. I'll make one now. Like, there's no John the Baptist anywhere saying, boy, wait till y'all see Gunnar Stockton overtake, Carson Beck. We don't want to have that harbinger out there right now. Let us see what else. Kent Holcomb asking about Carson Beck's future. Obviously, he could come back. He does have a year of eligibility. I honestly don't know. I mean, he has said before this was going to be his last year. I always thought that was kind of interesting that, he, before the season began, kind of acknowledged he was coming back for sort of, one more shot at it. I think a lot of how Beck will be remembered and how Beck will be evaluated, even by draft scouts, is going to be determined by what, he does over what Georgia fans hope is at least 5 more games, which would mean you won a game in the playoff. I think that's probably the case, that it's probably just too early to know that. All right, let's get ready to go. We're going to go. Back on YouTube for a second. JJ surprised to find out that Carson Beck could have another year. Yeah, Carson Beck could come back next year because he signed in the class of 2020. That was a COVID year. So Beck still has a COVID year left. Becky Rutledge, by the way, also lives in Chattanooga. He says, got to be louder than the Vols to win. We can't take any more of that orange. Becky, we're going to try to win it for you on Saturday. We really are. We're going to try to win it for you. Garrison Tucker asking about Malachi Starks. Yeah, probably not quite the season you would have hoped for Malachi Starks. But once again, another guy that, I think he's probably still playing fine, just not, you're not really saying like Thorpe Award right now for Starks, where maybe at one point in time you thought he might be among the very best defensive players in the entire country. But there's also still a really good chance that he comes on and has a big conclusion to the season there too. By the way, speaking of, enemy territory, Stephen Venanzi checking in from Nashville. A lot of Vols fans there, but Stephen's still representing these dogs. And by the way, it's also fair to point out that in the latest, Mel Kiper big board, Starks is still rated very high on there. Very high on there. All right. And by the way, Kent Holcomb also pointing out a lot of Tennessee fans up there in Gilmer County where he lives, and that is certainly true. All right, we're going to go for now. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including a plumbing emergency. They will get your water heater replaced same day if you need it. Also pipe burst, something like that. They're going to help you out with all of that. They're just really, really good at responding to plumbing emergencies in very quick fashion. That's what the RS stands for, after all, rapid service. They want to provide that for you. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.